Hi, I'm Sharon Chin, and I'm back again with our Cockadoodle Coffee Rooster sign. And the first thing we're going to do is start shading our rooster. I've laid 3 colors out on my palette: black, burnt umber, and burnt sienna. And I'm keeping my colored photograph right next to the board where I've got the design trace down. And I'm going to start with a round brush. I've got like an 8 or a 10 round, and I'm kind of going to just start dabbing in. You want this paint to be a little bit wet, so add a little water to it. And I want to start laying in some of the darker shadows. So I'm just cross-referencing back and forth between my photograph and my outline of the rooster and looking for the darker areas. And I'm going to start filling some of these in the red spaces with burnt sienna. That'll be a nice undertone to do some red washes over top of. Now the rooster's comb has a lot of texture to it, so you can put this in. You don't want it real smooth. You can have some darks and lights, and that's going to help create some of that little bubble texture that the rooster comb has. Just add a little more water to your paint whenever it starts drying out too much and doesn't want to move. If you look at the photograph, there's kind of like an almond-shaped area of dark around the eye. The top of the comb is sort of in shadow. I'm not real sure of what all the parts of the rooster's comb is, but I think this is maybe the wattle. So I'm going to shade around that. And we're going to go back up here and work a little bit more on that almond-shaped shadow around the eye. I won't talk through this whole video unless I have something important to tell you. This is a little different style of painting than painting base coats and shading and highlighting. I think you get a little bit more of a realistic look to your painting. And that's what I was going for in this photograph. I love this photograph. I didn't want it to look absolutely realistic, but I wanted some realism to it. So in Photoshop, I transferred the photograph and I did some different filters on it to tone down the realistic texture a little bit to make it a little more painterly looking. You can do all kinds of fun things in Photoshop with photographs. But again, I'm just trying to pick some of these darkest shadows out in this red area of the rooster's wattle and comb, and fill these in with the burnt sienna color. There's this little section kind of under his eye. It's almost white looking. It's got a little touch of red on it, but it's mostly white. Now, in these feathers that come down off the top of his head and the back of his neck, they're a real golden color with a lot of bittersweet in it. So I'm also going to use the burnt sienna to do some of the shading here in these feathers. And again, we're not trying to paint absolute replicas of the feather, but you just want to give some indication of the growth patterns and texture. So I'm going in and shading around the edges of the shadows where they touch the dark body. You can see kind of a burnt sienna shadow there on the photograph where the feathers hang down over the dark brown of his body. And now I'm adding some shading, just streaky shading, following the growth pattern of the feathers. So they kind of radiate out and curve down. The white of the background can, help provide some of the highlights. And we'll go back and, add some reinforcements and things later once we get this more sketched in. But the first stage of this bird is going to be adding all these shadows. That was my bulldog again. She has got excited about something, and you hear her little toenails clicking on the floor and her snorting. You can see as I'm doing this burnt sienna, it's not all the same tone. Even though it's one color, if you put it on a little bit more heavily, it is darker, and if you do more of a wash, it gets lighter. Now, as we come down into this dark area of the chicken, or the rooster, I'm adding a little bit of burnt umber that's going to darken it even further, because you can see these feathers on his chest and below this ruff on his neck are real dark brown. So we're stepping up the shadows a little bit and adding this darker color. And I don't worry about cleaning my brush in between, because it's good to have a little mix of the color to transition things. I guess in a sense this is sort of, we're sketching in the rooster with these browns, sort of earth tones. Now I'm stopping the shading within my oval border. We don't want to go out beyond that. You don't have to worry about getting too perfect of a line, but we just want to keep that in this oval that we drew on our board. I'm picking up a little bit of black, and we're going to darken the shading a little more. You can see again on the photo I'm looking at, down in this lower right corner or curve, um, some of our darkest shadows. So I'm starting to pick up a little bit of black and darken that down some more. And as I'm laying in the strokes, I'm again trying to follow sort of the direction of the feather growth. You can go back up around the wattle and start darkening some of these shadows. Just keep refining this a little bit. You can see there at the behind the eye, there's some pretty dark shadows in those feathers back there. And when you're working from a photograph, you can always exaggerate some things. If you want to bring something out more than it is in the photograph, just either strengthen your shadows or highlights to emphasize things a little more. Sometimes if I want to scrub an area out and soften it, I'll wipe my brush off, and then you can almost like you're getting a side load with a round brush. You can blend it out. I find I use a round brush more and more as I'm painting compared to the flats or angles. Again, just keep going back and forth to your photograph, and just keep refining, darkening shadows where you see they need to be emphasized a little bit more. And the change in values from dark to light are what give your painting form, make it feel more dimensional. I kind of try to base my shadows on what I think the undertone of that area is. So you can see in the areas that are more red and yellow, I'm using more of the burnt sienna. And the areas that are more of this really dark chocolate bittersweet color, I'm going in more into the burnt umber and black shadows. And look at the shapes the shadows create too. You can see that one behind the wattle and under the beak is kind of a triangular shape. I've added some more color to my palette now. The one we're going to work with for a minute is ultramarine blue. And I'm going to add some more detail to the shadows. If I look at some areas, almost have like a purple cast to them. So I'm putting a little of this blue up in the top of the comb and in areas that I just see just a slight purple cast to. So when we add our red over top of these, we'll get the effect of the two layers of color and it'll start merging together and looking just a little bit more violet in these areas. The blue on top of the burnt umber actually darkens it and gives you a nice organic black color. So this is also a way to darken down your shadows without going quite so stark as just black. And add just some little touches of the blue here and there just to repeat the color and bring your eye through the design. Now we've got a good first shot at the rooster. We've got all the shadows laid in, and our next step will be to come back and add some color.